Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as préféré, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello and welcome to Brussels, my love, our weekly talk show from the heart of Europe. Here we discuss what moves Europe, whether it's positive or negative. I'm Stefan Grobe. Thank you for joining us. Coming up this week, the clock is ticking. On the 9th of July, Donald Trump's punitive tariffs could go into effect unless some last-minute miracle could avoid repercussions for European exporters from cars to pharmaceuticals. Should the EU push for a quick trade agreement or keep fighting for a better deal? At last week's EU summit, Germany and France were at odds over how to proceed. Are there any good options at all? And the illegal march that was so popular. Hungary's ban on this year's Pride parade ended up being a slap in the face of Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Well over 100,000 people participated in what evolved into a powerful statement on the rights of the LGBTQ community, not only in Budapest but across Europe. The strong presence of EU politicians testify to that. Is the culture war over now? Enough food for thought for our guests this week, and here they are. Dirk Gottink, member of the European Parliament from the European People's Party, Cynthia Niworku, member of the European Parliament for Renew, and Frank Furedi, executive director of the Hungarian think tank MCC Brussels. Thanks again for joining us here in our studio, but before we get the conversation going, let's take a look at what keeps political and business leaders up at night.
Since taking office for the second time in January, Donald Trump has antagonized the EU more than ever. And as of July 9th, European goods going to the United States could face a 50% duty as threatened. Trump's pressure is forcing the European Union to make difficult choices, to fold, hold the line, or even escalate the trade dispute. Peace offers by Commission President Ursula von der Leyen have fallen on deaf ears in Washington, so that Brussels recently floated the idea of teaming up with the Asia-Pacific trade bloc, which also includes the United Kingdom. It's until mid-July that the EU has suspended levies on certain US goods to allow more time for negotiations. But time is now running out.
All right, time is running out. Cynthia, let me start with you by asking what happens on the 9th of July?
Well, what happens is that we move away from language like antagonise and pressure and words like that, because if we want to use the street parlance of what's unfolding from across the Atlantic, we could say that Trump ran out onto the street 90 days ago and said, "Hi, come everybody, look, mine is bigger than yours." And you know what? The stock market said, "No, it's not." And he got his comeuppance. So I think we remain fair and firm and considered. I'm talking about Europe, of course, and we remain united. Obviously, we've got a diversity of needs and opinions around the table. That's to be understood. We've got Ireland and Germany heavily dependent on exports, my own country, and we've got other countries who are heavily dependent on other exports of other products. Europe and Ursula von der Leyen and the Commission, we can't and she can't, they can't protect every country equally. That's not possible. But at the same time, consensus and considered collaboration.
Okay, Dirk, what's the word on the street here? What are you expecting to happen next week? Will Trump delay? Will there be a deal? Will we hit back? What is your sense?
Predicting Trump's behavior is probably the most difficult thing at the moment.
Well, that's why you're here.
And the people that that's not our business. Our business is protecting European interests as members of the European Parliament. We have to acknowledge that already 50% on steel and aluminium, 25% on cars and car parts, and 10% the Liberation Day tariff. So we're already bleeding. We know that we will not get less than 10%. I think that's a no-brainer.
That's the baseline
because they've adopted a budget in the US which includes the revenues coming from these 10%. So trying to obstinately go beyond that maybe is a waste of time. What we need to get rid of is the 50% on steel and aluminium and the 25% on cars, and try for our important sectors like pharma and others to get a decent deal. The UK did it, not perfect at all, but they did it, and I think maybe
without many details. But
you know what? Trump just wants to make a deal, and I don't think it really fits well with the way the European Commission approaches negotiations. We go budget line by budget line, and we go tariff category by tariff. All got lawyers at the table. They have cowboys at the table, and these people need to talk to each other in a way that is understandable. And I think the Commission can be a bit more pragmatic. And also seriously consider the consequences of a 9th of July standoff.
Right.
We will lose that standoff.
These guys are politicians. You're the only non-politician at the table here. You want to give it a shot? What's going to happen? They can be more diplomatic, but truly, what do you expect?
Well, I think the problem is that the relation is very asymmetrical between Europe and America. I'm very critical of the European Union Commission for being so slow to get off the mark. I mean, they had weeks and weeks and weeks to try to basically make a bigger impact in relation to the United States. And what I'm really worried about, I think that something that U.S. politicians find difficult to acknowledge in public is that Europe is not as united as you suggested earlier on. Europe is very divided because they all have very clear national interests in terms of their own economy. And this is where the asymmetry really kicks in, because what Trump is trying to do is to pick off different European nations one by one, and have good boys like Britain and bad boys like Ireland, sort of in the way that it's kind of working. I think I agree with the consensus that 10% is the baseline. Probably it will remain 10%. Where there's a lot of possibilities is on the non-tariff issues like digital technology, for example, where America wants concessions and is really pushing for concessions. And I think that if somehow specific deals can be made, some in America's interest, some in Europe's interest, like on cars, for example, to lower that 25%
the whole
tax.
Digital business will not be part of the trade discussions, right?
No, but it will be an add-on, obviously.
Yeah.
We saw how Canada reacted as well in terms of trying to do a deal with Trump. I don't accept that Ireland is in the bad boy category just because we're a small nation, but we have a huge export. We're the second largest EU exporter with our pharmaceuticals to America, just because the American pharmaceutical companies, a lot of them decided to locate to Ireland and so forth.
I wonder why.
I also don't agree that Europe is not as united as Frank suggests. I do believe that thus far Europe has responded in a united way, and I've listened intently and I've seen intently the bilateral discussions that happened between countries and across countries, and the reaching out that happened. And we'll say the case of Irish whiskey, for example, or the case of French wine or our Italian cheese, and the different sort of deals that were done. Obviously, it's very precarious. I accept that point. And national interest, some people say, and obviously you're entitled to your opinion, may trump over the European project. But thus far, the European project has held together. I'm hopeful. And I'm not certain, however, that there will be a deal. I mean, Trump has said himself, there could be a pause. There might be another pause. What would be good, I think, is obviously, as Dirk has said, 10%, nail it down, make it look like a victory for Trump, add on a couple of other concessions with regards to tech taxing and all of that, and get a clause in there which is an insurance clause that this kind of sort of behaviour on the part of Trump, chopping and changing, can't occur again. Lock it down, because the markets hate this instability and it's only going to hurt Trump. And that's why I mentioned at the start, he got his answer from the stock markets in the initial imposition. And hopefully, I know his memory isn't great, but hopefully he will remember that when it comes to next Wednesday, D-Day.
Dirk, just recently, Friedrich Merz, Emmanuel Macron and Giorgia Meloni are reportedly working on a common initiative to support European car makers. So they want to, and obviously the European car makers are coming from these three countries. We don't know the details yet, but it could include more flexibility on decarbonization goals, etc., etc. Is that sort of a solution here to avoid the big hit
I don't think so. I think the crisis in the European car manufacturing sector is years in the making. It has to do with slowness on the side of the manufacturers themselves. They missed the boat on the electrification, and now the standards are being made in other parts of the world. Chinese cars are competing on a qualitative level in the same category as our cars, and it has nothing to do with sort of that we have more ambitious climate targets or whatever. No, the business decisions have gone wrong, I think, and they're trying to catch up. But knowing the importance of the sector for European jobs and for European economies, so it's not only the actual making of the car, it's the car parts, it's a lot of the whole infrastructure around it. I think there's good reasons to be concerned about it, because this also touches our sovereignty, the ability of Europe to actually do stuff, make stuff. The Netherlands has one of the biggest steel producers in Europe. If you lose that, you lose the ability to produce actual heavy industry.
Speaking of car makers, we wanted to know from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, ACEA, how serious an escalating trade turmoil would be. And remember, this is, as you said, an absolutely a crucial industry for the well-being of the economic powerhouses, Germany and France, but also countries like Austria, Hungary, who produce spare parts, etc. Here's what ACEA told us. Take a listen.
The impact of these tariffs on our industry, on our European manufacturing is really significant. Our members right now are hemorrhaging money being paid on tariffs to the tune of around several million euros per day for some of the manufacturers. So you can imagine the impact that's over the longer term is going to have on our industry. The US is our second largest export market in terms of value. In our industry, predictability is one of the fundamentals of how you base your business. This is the complete opposite of this. This is making business completely unpredictable. We actually think it's counterproductive even for the US, because it's really impossible for manufacturers to make firm commitments around investment, whether it's in Europe or in the US or elsewhere, when they don't know what the terms of business are going to be tomorrow, next week, or even next year.
Frank, you've
heard
it.
Well, I don't think that there's going to be very many concessions on the automobile industry. No. And for America, this is really a very important area. It's one of the key sticking points. And there's, as I said, there's no way that these conflicting interests can be reconciled in the short or the medium term. Coming back to the point that Dirk made, which is the slowness of the car industry in terms of getting its act together, I would hope that the solution from a European point of view would be to begin to rethink how we can invest in new technology and somehow modernize our car industry, because it seems to me that unless we invest in raise productivity in car making, we're not going to be able to compete with the Chinese or with the Americans. I mean, the issue is not the tariffs. That's just a symptom of a much more profound problem. The issue is differential levels of productivity.
Yeah, productivity and competitiveness.
And that's got to be confronted.
Absolutely agree entirely. And look, we all know the conclusions of the Draghi report. We all know what's to be done, but it's in the interregnum period. How are we going to survive? And that's why we have to tread carefully. But yes, this is going to lead, I hope, to a huge wake-up call for innovation, for financing that, and for making sure that our car manufacturing industry, which we've just been speaking about, that is fully brought up to speed with green energy and so forth. And as Dirk has said, yes, behind the curve, but we've got to put investment behind that, remember. And we've got to fund innovation in Europe. We've got to become far more self-reliant, and we've got to find our own tech giants, and we've got to give them the space to grow and to take over.
So financing is an important part, but I would add that all these businesses, they live in the internal market, the European internal market. And that's where the biggest barriers actually are. We're talking about Trump tariffs. You know what our own tariff is on a non-completed internal market? On goods, it's 45%. On services, it's 110. So we're basically imposing ourselves massive trade barriers inside the EU that have, if you ask me, little to do with sovereignty and more to do with national complexities that we can simply simplify. We can make it easier to do business in Europe, and then already you would gain more than you're losing at the moment with the tariffs in the US.
Yeah. So if you look within Europe, I think that's where the solution lies.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because if we continue to talk about Trump and us, we get distracted from things that we can actually potentially control.
Correct. And new markets as well, Frank.
That's right.
We've seen how Ursula von der Leyen went on a tour of duty all around the world to seek out new trading partners and has done quite well. The Commission has really put efforts into that. And even today, my own Prime Minister, An Taoiseach Micheál Martin, he's in Japan. And again, there's more agreements and more trade partners being sought, reputable trade partners, I should add. And that's another leg of the stool, as well as the financing and as well as, you're so right, Dirk, deregulation, make the union a true union in terms of business.
Well, you said Trump and us and Trump. I mean, the fact is that the American and the European economies are heavily intertwined. Yeah. And Trump, when he tried to impose big tariffs during his first term, in 1 year, the U.S. lost $51 billion. That's 0.25% of their GDP. Yeah. Why would Trump think that this time will be different?
I think there's a displacement activity here because Trump's big problem is Asia and China, and he cannot really push China around the way that he thinks he can push Europe around. Mm-hmm. And I think Europe serves as a kind of example for the rest of the world. Look what I've managed to achieve in relation to Europeans.
Yes, it's theatre.
But the real focus is on another part of the world.
Yeah.
But it's our weakness that is making this possible for him to grandstand against us, because the Chinese, they started identifying very strategic components important for American industries, and they said, okay, let's stop exporting that to the US. And then the US made a deal with them. And there I think you really have the opportunity, again, if we would spend as much time, and I'm also talking to the German Chancellor and the French President, on the internal market rather than focusing on whatever Trump has done in tariffs, then we would actually make progress, because member states are blocking integration of the internal market at the moment.
Stefan, there's one other point as well, and that is the courts. And we may not think it's very important at the moment, but the Supreme Court in the United States has an appeal pending, and there's a freezing order on a reversal of what Trump has brought in, on the basis that it is undemocratic and that a decision can't be made by the president, but it should be made by the House and so forth. So I just say that because Trump has had hundreds of lawsuits slapped against him. It hasn't had much effect on him, but it's still there. And it's something that the stock markets were very grateful for, that freezing order that was imposed.
Yeah. Well, there's only another layer of insecurity in the whole.
Yes, but it is part of the democratic process that is holding in America. It's holding.
Now, there was no deal between Trump and China. What they did was they just erased the tariffs that they slapped on each other weeks
well, I think Europe would sign for that at the moment. So I call that a deal.
Here's my question: should Europe now team up with the Chinese to go after Trump?
It's not going after. I think Europe has a massive problem with China as well, because, and I see that I'm working on the customs union reform at the moment, and all the surplus production capacity in China at the moment is moving away from the US and being directed at the European market. It's a reason why you're getting great offers on your phone right now from Temu and Shein, and they want you to click. And that's what Europeans are doing. We are being flooded by excess capacity in China. You know, the domestic market in China is not going that good either. So they need to empty the warehouses, and they're basically dumping their overproduction in Europe, and at the moment we're not doing a lot of it.
Except
that was always the warning that we've heard, right, for the last 1, 2, 3 years.
But there's also a problem, which is there seems to be a fantasy amongst politicians that somehow we can bypass Trump by developing these close relationships with Asia and other countries, or Canada, and that's going to serve as an alternative point of economic growth. I think that's a fantasy, because the interests are clearly highly conflictual, and it's you can get together for a photo opportunity, but in terms of anything more decisive, that's not going to happen. And I think that time and again we have to come back to the fact that we have two important competitors, China and America. China is just as important as America is in the long run, and develop a strategy where we, in a sense, reshore in a much more profound way than we're doing at the moment.
Yes, I wouldn't categorise the way I would approach those new relationships with countries as a fantasy on my part or a fantasy on the part of the Commission. I think it's part of the solution. I think we have to look outwardly with countries that do abide by the rule of law, whether it's Canada, whether it's Britain, and that reset summit was very good.
China,
or whether it's that's why we have to be careful with China.
Well, we made a big mistake. We made a big mistake with China. We allowed them to somehow aspire to being a normal market economy, which they're not. And they're in the WTO. And they are at the moment also still considered a developing country under international standards.
They get the best of both worlds.
And they have the best of both worlds. So they're getting preferential tariff treatments on certain areas, whereas actually they hold the most amount of foreign currency in their reserves than any other country in the world.
Yeah.
So these are imbalances that we need to correct. But I agree with Cynthia here. We get Mercosur done. It's very important as an alternative, also for the Americas, I would say, and our autonomy when it comes to some sort of what do you call them, the strategic reserves that they have in terms of production, and of course the Pacific. I would be interested, but China is not a market economy. And I think we should not forget that.
Could I just clarify? I didn't mention the word Mercosur. And for the record, I represent a lot of Irish farmers. And for the record, in its current iteration, I am against Mercosur for the moment. But yes, I'm talking about CETA, getting all the countries of Europe to ratify CETA and Canada and so forth. But
with all due respect, Cynthia, the economy is not only farming.
Of course it's not.
A country like France opposes Mercosur. this is one of the G7.
But Stefan, we all want.
But there are wine producers
we all want
in France.
Food security, and we saw what happened when we had the illegal invasion by Putin into Ukraine, and we all need food security. And if food is extremely important, and so are our farmers.
Okay, so farmers are important. We got this. I subscribe to that. Thanks for this first round. We'll now take a short break, and then Pride and Passion in Budapest. What's next in the culture war? Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. Our guests are still Cynthia Niworku Frankfurti and Dirk Gottink. A few months ago, the ruling parties in Hungary attempted to ban the annual Budapest Pride march through a series of constitutional and legislative amendments on the grounds that it violated the rights of children and endangered their healthy development. We all know what happened then. The march became a municipal event in which tens of thousands of people participated. The police did not intervene and no major incidents were reported. Dirk, were you surprised by the massive participation?
Maybe if you look from the outside, yes, because usually everyone thinks that Orban and Fidesz have an iron grip on Hungarian society. But things are changing very quickly. And Fidesz is panicking now. They don't know what to do anymore. And their original instinct was, of course, we want to ban this pride because it's a culture war thing. But, the thing with freedom and democracy is that it comes out even if you don't want it to. And this was clearly much broader than a pride, in my view. It was a manifestation of Hungarians simply saying, we're starting to get enough of this, and this has gone too far.
Frank, was it a political miscalculation of Orban? Was it a self-inflicted wound? How would you
I'm not really sure.
That?
I mean, just for the record, the government did not choose to ban the march. It decided to ban the march in the middle of Budapest, but they could have had it any other part of Budapest. But
nobody is, right?
Yeah. I'm just saying that just to be clear on this. But I think what happened there is very interesting because my sources in the LGBT community in Budapest told me that they were determined to put on a very sort of conservative pride demonstration. There'd be no dangling of penises. There would be no naked people to kind of offend public sensibility. So it would look like a very respectable event. And the government, for its part, was absolutely committed to making sure that there would be no provocations which could be then represented as the government being violent or police coming in or anything like that. So they basically told the police to move off. And the only role that the police played was to get the counter-demonstrators out of there so there wouldn't be any conflict. So the whole thing was highly performative on both sides. The majority of Hungarians are against LGBTQ political culture, even now, and by a significant amount. And that's why even Peter Magyar, the TISA party, which is the main opposition, decided not to take a stand. They just went on holiday because they realized. So the government thinks that actually this is a clever thing. I don't know, because I think these things can blow up in your face.
Stefan, I was
Cynthia,
there. I marched. Yeah. I was there. And can I just say, for me, Orbán, and I know I'm from Renew Europe and I'm a centrist, rule of law, democratic politician, upholding equality and liberty to assemble and the right to be who you want to be and love who you want to love. But as far as I'm concerned, the Pride community and the LGBTQ, which obviously did spread out way beyond the LGBTQ plus community, they behaved impeccably, and it wasn't a performance. It was a manifestation of their basic human rights that couldn't be trampled on.
Conservative.
Yeah,
right?
but it wasn't performative in the sense that it was going to be for a particular audience.
Yeah. It's performative in the sense that they knew that they had to come across as a responsible alternative to the government. And that's what they were, all the leaders were saying, we are the people that are going to create a new Hungary.
Yeah.
Orbán's homophobic backsliding on all of this through legislation, which has been occurring for 5 years, is absolutely reprehensible. These are communities that are entitled to have these basic freedoms. They're enshrined in the laws of Europe, in the treaties of Europe. And Orbán is a signed-up member of the European Union. With that comes conditionality. He's got to abide then by the rules. If he doesn't, that's why there's so many. That's why there are so many Article 7 proceedings and other proceedings out against Orbán. And we need to increase those and say Europe doesn't stand for this.
What was interesting here, more than looking at other Pride parades, was the international interest and the international participation. And on that point, roughly 70 members of the European Parliament were
70.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now,
we had 10 from my
70.
grouping and
one of them,
Greens.
One of them was Cynthia. One of them was Maria Walsh from the centre-right European People's Party from Ireland also. We asked her about her view on the significance of the Budapest Pride. And here's what she said. Take a listen.
Many people believe that it is just Budapest or across the country of Hungary that's rolling back on the rule of law. It's not. It's many other countries. In my own country of Ireland, we sadly lost 2 members of the LGBTI plus community a couple of years ago through hate. We've had a number of attacks in different parts of the European Union. And I often say, when you get complacent or you think you have a right to have, that's where equality is so hard fought and very quickly lost. And that's, for me, the consistency in showing up in days like today, as well as in small Pride parades, is now more important, particularly what you see online and offline, and what you see on a geopolitical stage in terms of the United States. You can never become complacent in terms of your fundamental rights and freedoms.
Do you think Orbán is weakened now politically?
Well, he has been weakened significantly, because if you look at the polls, TISA is actually polling well over Fidesz, which is historic. And even in the countryside, they are making strides. They are making inlands into electorates that were totally in the control of the Fidesz propaganda and the state media, which is controlled by Fidesz.
I think he's weakened, and I think he's further weakened by the huge show of strength of the international community. So it wasn't just European politicians.
But that's strengthened
right across.
For me,
it doesn't.
I agree.
It doesn't.
It did because as far as Hungarians, a lot of Hungarians are concerned, all those people like yourself coming in from abroad are really in the business of regime change rather than on LGBTQ.
No, we're in the business of actually promoting democratic rights and giving them.
It's not your business. It's not your business to change the government of Hungary.
Well, sorry,
Hungarians'
he's a member.
He
is a participating member country of the European Union,
and
as another participating nation, I'm entitled to say, how are you standing up for the conditions that you signed up to?
It's not your job.
Sorry, it is my job. I'm an elected representative to represent the voters.
Yeah, we don't represent Hungarians.
I represent Europeans. I am Irish and I'm also European.
First of all, I think Maria Walsh's commitment to the LGBT community is out of question. She's not in the business of regime change. She's in the business of protecting minority rights, which is, especially in places with absolute majorities, is a very sensitive issue. Second point, which I think is also mentioned by Maria, is that in many places in Western Europe, the LGBTI community is afraid to go over the streets. They cannot hold their hands anymore. So all these politicians also going there, coming from places where actually those rights are much more in danger, I would say, than if you look currently at Budapest. It's a very safe city.
Listen,
Now it's a very interesting discussion, but we're at the end here, unfortunately. That's it for our second round. For now, many thanks to our guests and to our viewers at home. Stay with us. Welcome to Brussels, my love. I'm Stefan Grobe. My guests are Dirk Gottink, Cynthia Nieboku, and Frank Furedy. It's summer and it's hot. Very hot. A heat wave continues to grip large parts of Europe, from England to Romania, with authorities in many regions issuing health warnings and amid searing temperatures. Southern Spain has been the worst affected, with temperatures in the mid-40s Celsius recorded in Seville and neighboring areas. Heat waves are expected to become more common and more intense if greenhouse gas emissions are not significantly curtailed. But that's easier said than done. So, let me first go around the table here and ask you, how do you cope with the heat wave here in Brussels right now? Do you have any recommendations?
Move as little as possible.
Okay.
Stay indoors, keep your blinds shut, and go around with a little umbrella you normally use for the rain in Brussels,
right,
but use it now for the sun.
Okay, and Frank?
Preferably a pink umbrella.
Well, I actually enjoy it. I love the sun and I love the heat. And I actually think that the heat wave may well prove to be a blessing for Brussels. If you remember the normal weather in Brussels, a bit of sunshine.
Right.
It's a wake-up call, though. It's a wake-up call. And
scientists say that the June heat waves with 3 consecutive days above 28 degrees are about 10 times more likely to occur now compared to pre-industrial times. Are we prepared for this as a society?
No. I mean, if you look at, we've done a lot of the policy work that has been done in Europe has been about getting the emissions down. And I think we're leading in terms of what we have on paper in the legislation. Now we're in a very difficult process of actually transitioning the economy, our businesses and our households.
Well, we've done a lot on solar energy. We've done an awful lot.
We've done a huge amount, but it's...
And we've done a lot of pre-planning on wind energy, certainly in my country.
Yes, but heat waves is about adaptation. It's about adaptation.
Before we get then, and I still want to talk about the facts a little here and what's actually happening. And for that, I want to bring in Rafik Ramdi. He's an urban climate expert and was a member of the scientific committee for the preparation of the Paris Olympics last year. We wanted to know from him whether the current heat wave is normal, the new normal, or whether it will get worse. Here's what he said. Take a listen.
We will experience more and more heat waves. Maybe it will be one. Before, we had like one every 2 or 3 summer, one heat wave. But now it will be at least one heat wave every summer. So with the future climate change, it will just increase the frequency. We found that 1.5 degrees Celsius globally, if we reach on the global Earth 1.5, this means 4 degrees for Brussels increase with respect to the pre-industrial way. So this means that 4 degrees is really huge. We need to do effort. If not, we will cross the 1.5 in the next decade.
Very matter-of-factly, so 1.5 degrees Celsius warming globally means an increase of 4 degrees in Brussels.
It's a real wake-up call.
Now, is Europe, that's what would be my question, is Europe's policy response adequate?
Yes, not at all, because they haven't even looked at the human factor in it. So, for example, I'm actually shocked that nobody is taking the position of the elderly seriously. Because whenever there's a heat wave, whenever we have any real problems like that, it's the old people that are the most at risk in terms of becoming ill, becoming neglected. There's no policy that actually addresses that layer of society.
Yeah, I think summer of 22, I mean, that was sobering, the amount of deaths that we had. Yeah. Yes, and since then, one would have thought that we would have learned more lessons in terms of resilience and looking after, as you say, younger people, older people, folks, our infrastructure, the buckling of our train lines, the melting of our roads and so forth. Yeah, we need to up our game. We need to invest. It's back to the money.
So we've seen heat waves before. We've seen wildfires, and this week wildfires battled
in the Greek island.
In Greece, in Turkey, in France. 50,000 people were evacuated. Why is there no better preparedness?
But wildfires are, of course, something that a lot of those services down there are very used to. And actually, the wildfire season is something
but still, we have a wildfire season every year, and every year this is happening, and every year they're complaining about the lack of these planes.
In urban environments, where heat waves will have the biggest impact in a way to people's lives. It has a lot to do with how we build houses.
Correct. Yes.
Many research coming out also of the Netherlands suggests that 2/3 at least of the people in renting homes the homes are not adapted to heat waves. So, and we have to learn, for example, from South European architecture when it's about the thickness of the walls or the smaller windows or the way you deal with light. People want to have a lot of windows. In a heat wave, that's a big problem.
It's not all negative. Like in 2024, 40% of the world electricity was generated through renewables. We're not getting there fast enough. Yes, we do have the policy. Yes, we do have some of the rollout, but we need to now expedite it.
But there's a big jump to be made between that and the impact on human beings. For example, we tend to be scared to talk about the need for more air conditioning in Europe, because we think that that's bad for the environment. But air conditioning is really important, at least for certain sectors of society.
Correct, the old.
I really agree with you on the building. I mean, I just don't understand why we haven't learned the basics of architecture. I mean, where I live in Italy, we have thick walls like this.
Yes.
And in the winter, it keeps out the cold. In the heat, it keeps out the heat. There's so many basic things that could be done, but we're very fatalistic, I think. When it comes to the climate, we just lie back.
But this is a big topic for the upcoming discussion now in the budget. And we all have to push this forward, because the green agenda that we saw in the last mandate and all the legislation that has been enacted and all the climate zero targets for 2050 and along the way reviewing that 2040, 2030 and so forth, that really needs to be put into the centre of the debate now in the budget, which is going to be published in mid-July.
Well, you mentioned the
MMF.
The homes in urban areas, but wildfires are not in urban areas, and we still haven't cracked the code yet on how to protect these areas. And every year we see the same pictures, and every year there's talk about a lack of the adequate instruments to fight these.
If you look at even the service of the Commission has a 24-hour, 7 days a week emergency center where they coordinate airplanes that can drop water on
the drones as well.
They have a lot of our satellites are actually world class when it comes to targeting or finding stuff that's going on, recognizing how you can intervene. I think on wildfires, actually, we are much better than on heat wave adaptation, and especially, as Frank already said, on the elderly and the vulnerable groups in society.
Those were wonderful closing words. Thank you all so much. We've reached the end of Brussels, my love. Thanks to our panel again and to our viewers at home. If you want to continue the conversation on any topic, write to brusselsmylove@euronews.com or come to us on social media. That's it for today. I'm Stefan Grober. Have an excellent week. See you soon.